Vladislav Mandryka, who is a procurement professional from Ukraine, and we're going to talk about total cost of ownership. So Vladislav, can you first provide a brief background of yourself?
Hi Dustin, thank you for the opportunity of sharing my thoughts about total cost of ownership. I hope that this information will be useful and valuable for procurement professionals around the world. Couple of words about my experience. I'm procurement specialist in AnadoluEfes Group, and I have 10 years experience in procurement and various experience and skills in strategic sourcing, SRM, project management, supplier performance evaluation. And recently I have been thinking about TCO concept and particular systematic implementation of this approach. And moreover, I extracted some outcomes that could help to formulate how realize it gradually.
Thanks. Well, can you talk about why total cost of ownership is so important?
Well, TCO in broad definition is a process for knowing of all important supply chain related costs of doing business with supplier of goods and services. And TCO could improve decision making by procurement specialists or professionals, which could help to select options that have the best overall cost impact on a company or organization, rather than just compare different prices. And TCO looks like a big picture by considering many costs beyond the price. When purchase specialists procure something like items or services, there are some hidden costs, which includes different administrative costs, usage costs, disposal costs, and other particular elements of purchase price. For instance, hidden costs in offshoring include longer lead time, supplier distances, and other unforeseen costs. And in this particular case, longer lead time could result for increasing of inventory holding cost or safety requirements. So this is why TCO is so important.
What is the structure of TCO analysis?
Well, based on my experience, I would like to mention that TCO analysis include 5 simple steps. First of all, you should prepare for analysis. After that, you should map the process. After that, you should identify relevant cost. The fourth step is gathering data. And finally, you should perform the analysis. Let's consider all of this particular step. So, preparation for analysis. What is important on this stage? On this stage, you should define the potential for providing TCO analysis. You should provide ideally rough estimation of your potential savings, which you could receive during TCO analysis. On the second stage, which is map the process, you should create like a diagram which show you the flow of all your acquisition process. Include, in fact, the ordinary acquisition, usage, ultimate disposal of goods and services, process change, and so on. It is like a roadmap of your processes. On the third stage, which is identification of relevant cost, you should identify the exact costs, the exact hidden cost. And the several questions could help you in this way. So first of all, you should ask yourself, are you trying to understand the true cost of items or the entire useful life or not? Secondly, you should ask yourself, are you trying to compare various alternatives which you have, such as two different manufacturing processes, for instance? Third, you should ask yourself, are you looking for alternatives for improvement or not? One of the most useful decision is called like make or buy decision. Also, it is well known like outsourcing decision. On the next stage, which is gathering data, you should identify how the efforts of gathering data will be divided between your project team. Next, you should estimate the accuracy of data and choose the exact way how you will gather it. And finally, you should provide the performance analysis. So the performance analysis include, in fact, the next stage. First of all, you should determine the unit of analysis. Next, you should perform the sensitivity of analysis, and finally, you should present the analysis to your top managers.
My last question is, how do you define the unit of analysis for different commodities?
Well, let's consider it on some examples. First of all, you should provide the answer on the next questions. How does the company analyze and understand the costs of various purchases? It is very important to understand how you do it. Next question is, does the company consider annual expenditures or as your key performance indicator? And finally, you should understand, is it by piece price or some other performance measure? And there are 4 ways for examining the cost for particular project. I mean, measure or define the unit of analysis for so-called capital goods or capital expenditure. Next, identify it for office or manufacturing equipment. Next, identify it for consumables, and finally for services. Let's consider it on exact examples. So, for capital, let's imagine that we determine the TCO for purchasing of cars, and we use the cost per mile or kilometer based on how you drive. Assume that the present value of TCO is 29,000 over the 5 years period, included trade-in value. And let's imagine that you plan to drive the car during 85,000 miles or 137,000 kilometers during that time. So how to define the relevant total cost of ownership? Well, you should divide your present value. It's in our case $20,000 on 85,000 miles, and you receive the cost per mile. When you consider the another example is purchasing of office or manufacturing equipment. Let's imagine that we purchase a copy printer and use the actual number of images that we plan to print or copy as the volume. So let's assume that the present value of copy printer, including maintenance, suppliers, and other relevant items, is $500,000. And let's imagine that we plan to use the copy printer for 3 years and create let's imagine that it will be like 200,000 images during that time. So how we define the relevant TCO? We should divide present value, which is, as you remember, 500,000 pieces, dollars, and you should divide this amount of on total quantity of images, 200,000 images, and you receive the cost per image, and it will be your relevant cost. The next examples is how to define unit of analysis for consumables. And for this way, let's assume that your company purchase 50,000 of integrated circuits. Let's call it like ICs in order to simplify the process. And the total purchase value is $500,000. Additionally, you pay $2,800 for insurance, warehouse storage, and so on, and testing. And let's imagine that 10 ICs are damaged and unusable. So the main question, how to define the unit of analysis? Well, you should summarize your total value of ICs. In our case, it's $500,000. You should summarize it with other total costs. In our case, it's 2,800, and divide on every particular quantity of worked ICs. In our case, it's 49,990 ICs, because as you remember, 10 pieces were damaged, and in this way you received the total relevant cost for one ICs. And the final example is how to define the unit of analysis for services. For this way, let's consider such example like purchases of cleaning services, and let's assume that the company and you as purchasing specialist received a quotation for cleaning and processing plant from one supplier, which is going to do it during 250 times. And the quotation for these services is $30 per hour, including all suppliers. And it will require 20 person hours each day. So how to define the relevant TCO for 1 year? Well, you should multiply. Hourly rate is $30 per hour. You should multiply it for 20 hours, and finally multiply it for 250 days. And in this way, you received the unit of analysis for services. In our example, it's $150,000. So I hope that this rather simple examples clearly shows how to use TCO and to provide to define the unit of analysis.
And thanks for sharing today, Vladislav.
Thanks again. Hopefully that procurement professional find this interview very useful.